Hello and welcome to the We're Not Experts History podcast. My name's James and with me is Sarah.
Hello.
Hello. As you can tell by the fact that I do an introduction, it's Sarah's turn. So I'm not only speaking for myself, but I'm speaking for our listener when I say this better be good.
Of course it'll be good. It's always good when it's my turn.
I've got things to be getting on with.
All right. Calm down. I can tell you're secretly really excited about this, even though you don't know what it is, but
Come on, these cushion covers aren't going to shampoo themselves.
The what? Is that?
Should we move on?
Yeah, let's just not even. Yeah. Okay.
You know what you're telling us about today within the next 15 minutes or so, no more.
It might take longer, but we are going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about fog.
Smog?
No. Well, yes, it was a smog. Stop spoiling it. Fog. Let's start with fog. Imagine it's London. It's 1952, December.
Oh, I'm there.
And you step outside and you regret it straight away because the city has literally vanished into a thick, smoky soup is probably the best way to describe it. Can't see street signs, you can't see buses and cars, and suddenly you're having to use your scarf as a personal air filter because the air is just so thick and smoky. And this actually happened. This was called the Great Smog, and it was for 5 days. London was literally wrapped in a blanket of soot, coal smoke, and probably general confusion, I imagine.
Yeah,
not good. People are coughing, cars are inching along. I mean, cars didn't move very fast in those days anyway, but now they're literally at snail's pace. It was a pretty intense time in London. So yeah, that's what I'm going to be talking about. The Great Smog of 1952, which seems really, really far away, but it wasn't really. I mean, my grandparents married in 1952, so you're only going back a couple of generations, and you're there.
I was going to say, did your grandfather benefit from your grandmother not being able to see him?
Well, no, they actually married in July, so they married before the smog.
Oh, before this. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so can't blame the smog for that. But anyway, moving on. 1952. Obviously, we've just had World War II. So London is a city that has seen better days and worse days, to be fair. The war has left chunks of the streets missing, roofs are patched, and I imagine people are a little bit wary about what might fall out of the sky, although by now it's mostly bricks and rain rather than bombs, you would hope. Coal is still king. It heated homes, it powered industry, but soon coal would contribute to one of the city's stickiest situations. So we've still got rationing. Obviously, rationing didn't just end when the war ended. Rationing did continue well into the 50s. So people are having to make do with what they had. And you can imagine the families kind of huddled around their coal fires in drafty flats and houses, drinking tea, of course, and wondering what they could rustle up for tea. And when I say tea, I mean dinner. I don't know if you say dinner or tea. I don't know how you...
Tea is a drink, dinner is a meal.
It depends where in the country you are and where you grew up. So when I have a story now. When I had a brief stint living up north, up in Lancashire, I worked in a hospital up there, and I confused the patients because, funnily enough, I grew up with my parents would refer to dinner as tea. You know, oh, it's tea time, come in for your tea. And then I ended up evolving out of that when I moved out. I started to refer to it as dinner time.
Yeah.
Probably just going along with what my husband was used to. But then when I went and lived up in Lancashire for a short while, the Northerners, to them, tea meant dinner, meant food. So when I was offering patients, oh, do you want some tea? They were looking at me like, oh, it's only 2 o'clock. Like, what are you talking about? You had to say brew. You had to say, do you want a brew? Then they knew that you meant a drink. Yeah. And tea meant, to them, meant dinner.
Confusing them. Look at it more as trying to educate them.
Yeah, but what's to say that they're wrong and we're right?
I am.
No.
I've just told you.
No. I still say tea, to be honest. I kind of swing, I go between the two. Sometimes I will refer to it as tea when I'm talking about dinner. But anyway, obviously our housemate is from up north, so she will say tea as well. So we've kind of gone back to going between the two. Sometimes we say dinner time, sometimes we say tea time.
Get her out of such poor habits.
Well, I know what she means, so that's good enough. But anyway, that kind of went off the beaten track a little bit. Yeah, so
I think you were just finishing.
I was just filling some time, yeah, because I've got nothing to say. No, I have got some. I have plenty to say about this. Anyway, we are talking about our families huddled around their coal fires, and yes, so they're using their coal fires. Meanwhile, you've got the factories puffing out smoke like nothing's happened because, you know, we just had a great big war. The city is determined to keep moving, and smoke is just part of the scenery. As is fog. Londoners were used to fog, you know, the kind of fog that made the Thames look a bit mysterious and gave poets something to write about.
That romantic view of foggy London, yeah. Yes.
But the combination of the smoky industry, the coal fires, and in this instance, the right sort of weather, or the wrong sort, it depends how you're looking at it, meant that a fog in 1952, it wouldn't be your mysterious fog, it would hang around, a very stubborn, sticky pest of a fog. And it caused no end of problems, as we will talk about, or I will talk about. So December the 5th, 1952, obviously we know we're in 1952, London woke up to the usual grey chill, nothing remarkable. But by lunchtime, it was as if someone had literally poured a bucket of soot over the city and just not cleaned it up.
Rude.
Yeah, and all of a sudden it must have been like it suddenly become nighttime in the middle of the day, because all of a sudden you just couldn't see. You know, the street lights were barely glowing. You couldn't see buses, and yeah, it was just suddenly. I mean, it didn't just appear out of nowhere. It did have some very determined helpers. The early part of December was unusually cold and very still. Naturally, people are burning more coal to heat homes and businesses, so that resulted in more smoke. And then
might have to start doing that myself.
Yeah. As if this wasn't bad enough, nature decided to pitch in, and normally warm air rises and it carries the pollution away. But in this instance, there was a high pressure weather system which had parked itself over London, and a temperature inversion. It trapped all the cold, smoky air close to the ground, and because there was no wind to disperse the smoke, it just kind of stayed there, and it just wrapped itself around the city, and it wasn't just smoke. It was kind of a mixture of soot and sulfur and chemicals, and very, very hazardous, this fog. It wasn't just a nice misty, when you have stayed, I mean, I know you've been out and stayed in the countryside, when you go for a nice early morning stroll and you've got that nice misty, dewy fields, it wasn't like that at all.
We get that in Basildon as well.
Yeah, I very rarely go out that early now. I'm normally awake that early, but because one of the benefits of working from home is I don't have to leave the house at 6 or 7 in the morning anymore, which is quite nice. So yeah, I haven't actually seen fog for a while because it's normally cleared up by the time I have to venture out. But anyway, but this was a different fog. It was dangerous, to be frank. It was a dangerous fog, and we'll come to that shortly about how dangerous it actually was. But yeah, it just it just appeared and just kind of parked itself over the city, and it stayed for 5 days. This wasn't just a couple of hours. This was 5 solid days of this persistent fog, and it was a changed city, and there wasn't really a panic. I've kind of been researching eyewitness reports, and no one really panicked because fog wasn't new to London. London was infamous for its fog, and they even used to call them pea soupers because, they were so used to, ever since the Industrial Revolution, when coal became a thing, the city was used to having, this thick, smoky atmosphere. It was just the norm. And it's really funny, actually, because when you, I don't know about you, but when you think of atmosphere, like this sort of heavy, smoky, polluted fog, I always think of the Victorian times. I always associate it with those times, but it actually continued on, didn't it?
I don't think weather would react to the death of a monarch. Oh, it's no longer the Victorian period. We might as well stop.
No, I'm not talking. Sorry, I'm not talking about the weather. I'm talking about just because of the coal.
The romanticising about London in the fog with the gas lamps lighting the streets, just that glow of the gas lamp in the fog.
Yeah, but you always associate that to being the Victorian era. But obviously, yes, it wasn't as if people, the Victorian era ended and everybody stopped using coal. It went on and on and on for a bit. And again, it's something we'll come to. But let me go back to what I was saying. So we're talking about what it was actually like for Londoners. So as I said, there wasn't a real panic as such. It was just one of those things that people just quietly got along with. So visibility is reduced to almost zero, to the point where people had to shuffle rather than walk, feeling for curbs and lampposts. And driving would be difficult and at times impossible. Cars were just forced to move along very, very slowly. And like I said before, this is the 1950s. Cars weren't designed to move very quickly, but that even they had to kind of move along at a snail's pace. And in some cases, people actually had to abandon their cars in the street because the fog was so bad that they couldn't see to drive safely. All public transport other than the underground was halted, and the number of car accidents placed ambulance services under huge strain. and the smog even seeped indoors. So that resulted in many cancellations of concerts and film screenings, because anywhere where there was a large enclosed space, like a theatre or a concert hall, you couldn't see. You wouldn't be able to see the stage because the visibility was so poor. But life continued, because Londoners, they've just lived through a world war. It's going to take more than a bit of fog to take them down, and people just cracked on. Obviously, many people tried to stay at home and just avoid going out in the fog, and they would cover their windows and doors to kind of try and prevent it from creeping in. The only downside of this was that when people were indoors, they were obviously trying to stay warm indoors. They were burning more coal, and that was just adding to the problem. Those who did brave the outside, they would cover their faces with makeshift masks. This all sounds very familiar, doesn't it, in some ways?
Yeah.
Obviously, without take the fog out of it. But the old makeshift before face masks become a thing. I remember seeing people tying scarves around their heads and just makeshift things just to cover their faces. So it was a bit like that. And those that could afford it, you could actually purchase a protective smog mask from a chemist. So I imagine that these smog masks, I haven't researched this extensively, but I imagine that these smog masks were something that already existed, because obviously London was already famous for heavy fog, which some people may have struggled with. I can't imagine they would have very quickly, within 5 days, I don't think they would have suddenly created these smog masks. I think they already were in production.
Yeah, they've just things that are, yeah.
I'm sure sales would have increased massively over those 5 days. But there was a hidden toll to this fog. Obviously, people are just quietly cracking on, just shuffling around, avoiding driving, avoiding going out. But there was a real danger behind this fog that didn't become apparent until after. So at first, people are just treating it as an inconvenience. It's just a bit annoying. A bit like the COVID situation. To start out with, it was just a bit of an inconvenience. Oh, can't go out, got to cover your face, all of this stuff, and you don't realise how serious it's going to get. And this was very similar. Thankfully, this didn't last as long as the COVID situation, but the effects were still far-reaching. So hospitals began to notice it first. Suddenly, the wards are filling up with people that just can't breathe, particularly the very young, the elderly, anyone with chest or heart conditions, and what many assumed to be a bout of winter illness turned out to be far more serious. And the fog, it wasn't just thick, it was toxic. It was absolutely toxic, because it was a mix of soot, sulfur dioxide and acid, all the chemicals that the factories are pumping out into the air, which would normally be dispersed and carried away. It was all just trapped in this foggy blanket. And people were breathing this in, and it was coating their lungs, which, even if you're a normal, healthy person, that's not going to do you a lot of good. But if you've already got issues,
underlying illness.
Yes.
A phrase that came up a few years ago. Yeah.
Yes, and so you've got your doctors and your nurses working tirelessly, but it wasn't until days later that the true impact became clear. And the reality is, thousands of people during those few days, thousands of people died from inhaling this fog. And from a personal point of view, my granddad's sister, who was 19 years old, was actually died as a result of the London
19.
fog. She had asthma. So
Yeah.
she was 19, she had asthma, and she died in the December of 1952 during the fog, during the smog. The smog is what contributed to her death. And what's very sad is I mentioned that my grandparents married in July, and she was their bridesmaid in July, and just come December, 19 years old, and she's gone. And this wouldn't have been what's the word? An isolated case. You know, it wasn't just my family that were mourning a loss.
No.
This was happening to thousands and thousands of people.
I've just had a look, and the estimates are from as little as 4,000 or as many as 12,000 people died as a result of this smog.
Yes, well, there was a report published in 2004 which suggests that the number of facilities was around 12,000. That wasn't what was recorded at the time, but obviously, I imagine as well, in all the confusion, a bit like the Great Fire, you know, not many deaths were recorded during the Great Fire of London. In fact, I think it was under 10 people, but there would have been a lot more that would have died as a result of the Great Fire that wasn't initially recorded. Yeah. So it's later on when you look at the figures, you see, oh, actually, it was a lot more than what we thought.
I seem to remember there was also, obviously, smog not being an officially recognised cause of death. So a lot of people were put down as breathing problems or asthma or something like that. Yeah. So it looked like there was less people.
Yes.
That were
and obviously as well, a lot of people, the deaths continued after the 5 days. So, you know, it wasn't obviously thousands of people died within that 5 days, but then there were many, many deaths that followed afterwards. So yes, like you say, it may not have been, their deaths may not have been recorded as caused by the fog, but the fog would have contributed to the death. Again, a bit like COVID, many people that would have had underlying health conditions or would have died, and yes, COVID may not have been recorded as the cause of their death because they may have died from an asthma attack or other things, but COVID would have contributed to that. And you know, so it was the same sort of thing, and that's why the figures do vary greatly. But the report from 2004 does suggest that the number of fatalities was a lot higher than what was initially recorded. So a lot, that's a lot of people in a short space of time, considering as well the population wasn't nearly as high as it is now, and they've just had a huge population decrease because they've just had a world war. So, you know,
followed by a baby boom.
Yeah, it's almost like nature trying to correct itself, saying, "Oh, too many being born at once. Well, let's fix that."
Well, do we blame nature, or do we blame ourselves, human nature, for polluting the air?
Bit of both, really. Bit of both, really. Yeah. I think it was kind of it was a team effort. You know, the coal in the industry did the cooking, and then the weather just served it up on a plate. So it was team effort, I think. Bit of both. But obviously, yes, you can't have one without the other. But we'll go into that. So the fog's lifted and the full extent of the damage has become clear. You know, you've got thousands of people that have died, and it, like most tragic events that happen in history, yes, they are awful and many people are affected, but it did force the city to look more closely at the air it was living with on a daily basis. And there was a realization that things could not go on as they were. It's a bit like when there's what's it called? When a road has a blind bend on a road, for example, and people go on and on and on about reducing the speed limit on that road, and it will only take until there's been so many deaths, and then they go, oh, actually, yeah, we need to do something about that. It's the same sort of thing.
Reaction to, correct.
Yeah. So obviously they've just had an absolute tragic event. They've lost thousands of people in a very short space of time. So now they're thinking, actually, we need to do something about our pollution because it's killing people. And to be honest, it probably would have been killing people and not doing people a lot of good for a long, long time. But it's kind of suddenly it's in your face, isn't it? When it's all those thousands of people in one go. So in the wake of the Great Smog, London did find itself at a bit of a turning point. And although the fog had lifted, the shock it left behind lingered, and you've got newspapers carrying stories of families that had lost loved ones. Doctors are talking out about the conditions that they had battled through. And the politicians, after the usual head scratching and finger pointing, realised that something had to change. And the city could not carry on filling the air with soot and just hoping that the weather would be a bit kinder. That's not really feasible anymore. So it took time because obviously things don't happen overnight, but momentum started to build, and scientists and public health officials started to push for stricter rules around pollution. And the Londoners, who had spent 5 days stumbling through a smoky maze, they were more than ready for cleaner air. Now, this didn't happen overnight. Obviously, Britain loved its coal fires. They were very warm, they're familiar, they're part of everyday life. But as we have just realised, the cost of coal is high. You know, it's costing lives, all this pollution. So in 1956, which was the year my dad was born, after quite a few years of debate and lots of pressure, the government introduced the Clean Air Act. Now, this was a landmark piece of legislation, and the aim behind it was to steer Britain towards a less smoky future. And it encouraged the use of cleaner fuels, created smoke control areas, and began the very, very slow process of phasing out coal burning in homes and industries. So slowly, streets that were once filled with soot on a winter's morning gradually saw clearer skies. And slowly, the pollution started to lift. Of course, now we've replaced it with car exhaust fumes. But again, that's now reaching a head, isn't it? Where they're now trying to phase that out. So, you know, it's the what's the word? It's the processes. It's like the cycles we go through. So obviously back then the pollution got to a point where it got significantly bad. They changed things, so we had clean air for a while, and then we started to pollute it again with our fast cars and diesel engines and all of that. But going back to the Clean Air Act, it wasn't perfect and it wasn't instant, but it did signal something important. And the smoky, fog-choked London of old finally began to fade. And I touched on it earlier, but this is what it didn't surprise me, because I did know that obviously they were still burning coal back in as late as the 50s, but it was something you don't really think about. And like I say, you always, when you think of a smoky, fog-filled London full of pollution, as in coal pollution and smoke, you think of the Victorian times and that kind of era, and you don't think, oh my, it was kind of during my even, I mean, my parents were both born in the 50s, so it was kind of during that era that so it just makes it seem really close. It makes it seem only a generation back, and it was a completely different world. But yeah, what can the smog teach us today? Well, not a lot, apparently, because we've done it again. We don't learn. That is the thing. That is one thing history teaches us, is that we don't learn. I don't know if you get that, but that's how I feel.
Oh, no, we never.
I feel like we just keep doing it again and again. History repeats itself. We know this.
Yeah. I mean, we're not getting this wrong, but we're still polluting the air.
We are,
Well,
and
some of it might be.
No doubt. I know they're trying to work on all these hybrid and electric cars and all of this stuff, and gradually diesels a bit. I mean, I don't know if, I know a lot of car companies now don't make diesel cars anymore, so diesel's being phased out. I imagine eventually petrol will be phased out. Hopefully not anytime soon, because
I believe there's targets.
Yes, and as long as they don't phase out classic cars, that would be tragic.
I don't think you can phase out something that's already happened. I don't think they're going to ban them anyway. Yeah, you can't phase out something that's you can't suddenly phase out the Morris Minor.
Good, that's
because they don't make them anymore.
They don't, but as long as they don't ban them, that's the word I was looking for. Or I'll start putting them under ULEZ and all that nonsense. But anyway, that's a subject for another day. But yeah, so all in all, the Great Smog of 1952 is still remembered today, because it wasn't that long ago. There are many, many people still alive today that can remember the Great Smog. I did actually find, and one of them made me giggle, because I found a few accounts of people, and one of them said, I was 2 at the time, and I don't remember much about it, as I was in hospital for weeks after being run over by a bus in the smog.
Yeah.
So,
I imagine there was quite a lot of road deaths caused by that weather.
I mean, thankfully, this person didn't die, because they are writing about their experience on Facebook.
Right about it was a seance. But there's stories as well. I don't know whether they're apocryphal or not, but there's stories of people being led home from like the tube stations by blind people.
Yes, I heard that.
Yes, knew the way. Yeah,
I heard that many blind people offered their services to guide people, because for them it was just normal to have to work your way home. Yeah, I mean, a couple of accounts I read. Many of the accounts came from people that were children back in the 50s, and one of them said she can remember having to her father was driving home, and she had to hang out of the car window to guide him and to tell him when he was getting too close to the curb, because you couldn't see where the road was. Pretty mad, actually. I would have got out and walked, to be fair, but I
think safer not driving.
Yes, which, to be honest, a lot of people would have done that. They would have, and cars were abandoned in the streets, and people just got out and walked, because it was safer to do that than it was to try and navigate your way home in a car. But yeah, overall, the Great Smog, it was tragic, but it was also a turning point, and it was just one of those brief moments in history where London kind of paused and decided to try a little bit harder and do better. And now they're doing it again, and we'll see what comes of that. But yeah, that was the Great Smog of 1952. So there we go.
Yeah, I'm not just speaking for myself, but also for our listener when I say, thank God that's over.
It wasn't that bad. I thought it was quite an
I
interesting
think
topic.
you obviously have that personal link to it because your dad was
Yes.
born in the 50s and you lost an aunt or a cousin, whereas obviously my ancestors at the time were all living out this way in the country, so
Wouldn't have affected them.
yeah, no,
Anything relating to kind of London history, yes, it does strike a chord with me because yes, that is where my ancestors all come from. So I always find anything relating to London, particularly when you go back only a few generations, so sort of the 40s and the 50s, it does, yeah, it does strike a chord because I think, oh, you know, my nan and granddad were around then, and they would have lived through that, and yeah, it does make it. I guess for you, it's like the Great Flood of Wickford in the 50s. That would probably be of more interest to you because you had
oh yeah,
ancestors living in Wickford at the time who would have
and
experienced
we're
that.
involved in
Yeah,
yeah,
so you would be like, oh, you would probably be more, not excited is probably the wrong word. Um,
more linked to it, yeah.
yes, yeah, exactly. So this is what it's like for me when I read about things like this because, you know, well, as I said, my family were directly affected by the smog. You know, they lost Rose, who was 19 at the time. So, um, yeah, very interesting. But
Terrible.
there
Yeah,
we go. We don't learn, but still interesting to research and talk about. And for anyone that is interested, it's definitely worth having a look online. There are so many what's the word accounts of
yeah, yeah. I
yes
imagine
and
there's going to be newsreels as well. You can watch on YouTube probably.
yes, more than likely. But even just reading people's accounts, and not all of them are relating to the 1952 smog, because the 1952, yes, that's the one that kind of goes down in history. But there were other um, events very similar in other cities around the country. It wasn't just London, you know. There were other events where it was a similar situation where the heavy pollution caused these smogs, these kind of, you know, really heavy fogs that impacted daily life. And it is really interesting reading the accounts of people that lived through it and their stories and their memories. You know, people can remember having to walk to school with a scarf around their head, and then when they would take it off, it would be black with soot. And just things like that, and or having to feel your way along the road because you couldn't see where you were going, but everyone just got on with it. Everyone just cracked it. Can you imagine if that happened now? It would be absolute uproar.
Experience.
It would be the
Yeah,
government's fault.
well,
Um,
yeah, of course it is. I agree.
yeah. So anyway, there you go. So that's that. That is the Great Smog of 1952, and that's me done talking. So I'll let
Yeah,
you.
I think
I'll let you round
yeah,
off.
yeah, I think we did allocate that one to Rose and to everyone else who was affected,
Yes.
died during the Great Smog. And I'll say thank you for listening. We really aren't. I can't emphasise this enough. We really aren't experts.
No.